Thank you, Alastair, for coming on to this podcast. I'll just quickly introduce you. Um, Alastair Humphreys is a British adventurer and author. He has been on expeditions all around the world, traveling through over 80 countries by bicycle, boat, and on foot. He has crossed the empty quarter along with a companion in 2013. In 2009, he walked across India. He rode unsupported across Atlantic Ocean in 2012, and the list goes on. He was named as one of National Geographic's Adventurers of the Year for 2012. Now, after years of expeditions all over the world, he has spent a year exploring the small map around his own home. The question he asks is simple. Landscape marked by the glow of city lights and hum of busy roads hold any surprises for him? Could a single map provide a lifetime of exploration for a world traveler? Let's get some answers from him. So over to you, Alastair.
Well, thank you, Ash, for having me. It's nice to chat to you and to meet you, a fellow adventurer. Maybe we'll chat about some of that later. Yeah, I've just written a book called Local, which is my look at adventure after seeing it in very different ways for 20 years. So as you've explained there, my adventures began as big as they could possibly be, going all the way around the world by bicycle. And over time, I've started to get smaller and smaller with my focus and my attention, realizing that in some ways, I know more about distant continents and distant countries than I do about my own place where I live. And quite often if I think to myself, oh, I want to have an adventure, my first thought is, oh, I must buy a plane ticket and fly a long way away from where I live. But that seems a bit crazy because there are things just near to where I live that I've never seen before and that are maybe interesting if I just went to explore them with some curiosity. So I bought the small map for where I live. The whole of Britain's divided up into these maps. They're called Ordnance Survey maps, about 20 kilometers by 20 kilometers. And each of those maps is then divided again into 1 kilometer grid squares. So my idea was for a whole year to explore only this one map that I lived on, and to do that by going out every week, once a week, to investigate a single grid square, 1 kilometer by 1 kilometer. That was it. I was a bit worried that as somebody who likes traveling a long way and traveling far and traveling fast, that I might find this really restrictive, claustrophobic, boring. But actually, I soon realized that once you start to pay attention, there is so much in 1 single kilometer. And each week I'd go out as the seasons change, the winter, the spring, the rain, the sunshine, to try and learn about the nature, the history, anything I found. And the single most important part of the whole project was just to decide to myself that everywhere is interesting and everything is interesting. And once you start to look at the world with that positive eye, then suddenly everything does become interesting. And I soon realized that one small map was actually far too much to see in just a year. And maybe actually you need a whole lifetime to know the place where you live.
Yeah.
So that's what I've been doing recently.
So what from what I've read, from what you have written recently on adventure.com, I read that, and you say that I live in one of the most wildlife depleted lands on the planet, where every single river is contaminated with chemicals, in a population that is the most disconnected from nature in all of Europe. The public only has right to roam on 8% of England's land. And I resonate with that statement because I felt the same when I was living in England, because I used to write about these things and people thought that I was taking a piss on the English, but it wasn't like that, because I was just observing as an outsider who saw jungles growing up in all four corners. So what would you say about that? What would you say about the right to roam? Because that's a very important issue in England, I suppose.
Yeah, it's interesting because I grew up in England, in Yorkshire, in quite a beautiful part of England. And I love that landscape. It was my home. So I've always thought, oh, England is green and beautiful, and we have really nice countryside. And it's taken me a long time and a lot of reading to learn that actually this is not what our landscape used to look like. And actually, there's hardly any trees in our country. And that's not just the way things are. It's weird. It's because we've chopped them all down and now we have sheep everywhere eating everything. So,
Yeah.
my original thought when I saw England was, oh, this is beautiful and green. But it's interesting you coming in with fresh eyes from outside, look around and think, whoa, this place is weird and empty and sad. Um, so yeah, it's taken me a while to shift my eyes to see now not just a beautiful green hill, but to think that's a shame that there are no trees or different plants or variety on there as there would be, say, in a jungle. And then the right to roam is an interesting issue now, and it's becoming more talked about in Britain as more of us feel disconnected from nature. We spend more time in our homes, on our screens, the sort of digital lifestyle, and we miss out on the health benefits of being in nature, the physical benefits, but also the mental benefits. We're also stressed and
Yeah.
busy.
Yeah.
And this is, I think people accept that this is really important now. But in England, most of our land is owned by rich landowners, and it's off
I
limits to
I
people.
read somewhere that 70% of land is owned by 2% of people. Is that true?
Um, I don't know exactly, but I would think it very probably is. Yes, yeah. There's people own this crazy amount of land. There's a big argument going on in England at the moment over whether you're allowed to wild camp in Dartmoor down in the southwest of England. It's a beautiful little national park, and traditionally it's been one of the few wild places in England where people go and camp wild. Camping without paying to camp. And yet that even the wild lands of England are all still owned by somebody. So this land there is owned by this ridiculously rich guy who owns thousands and thousands of acres of England. He's also got thousands and thousands of acres up in Scotland, and he's now going to court to try and ban these few people who just want to go camping. So it does seem a crazy situation. And what's extra weird is that in Britain we have the island of Britain. We've got England, Wales, and Scotland, as you know. And in England, you're not allowed to wild camp. In Scotland,
And you
you
are.
are allowed to roam around the hills and wild camp, and the countryside there doesn't get trashed and destroyed. So it seems like a crazy system.
Yeah, I think like when I was living in Huntly next to Aberdeenshire in Scotland, and I was doing gardening over there. I was working on like a big farm over there for some time, and I used to go out to roam around in the nearby woods, right? And I looked at it and I thought that this is wild, this is wild nature and all of that sort of stuff. But it took me quite some time to realize that this is not actually wild. It's just like it's like artificially planted nature, and it gets cut down because two or three hills past there would be a hill which is completely cut down. So there's no proper wilderness to be found even in Scotland. And what this like I was in London at one point, and I had a friend called Joe, and we were talking about something about going wild, or walking in the wild and something like that. And I said that it's weird to have directions when you're going on a wild walk, and you have like directions going right and left and all that sort of stuff. And that sort of completely negates the point of getting lost in the woods, kind of. And he was confused because I think he was from my generation. He was some 2021 something back then, and he said that it's wild for me to even think that there could be a place without directions when you go into the woods, because he grew up with those directions. So I think like the next generation is getting a very weird sign, or very weird education about what wilderness is. You know, what do you
Yeah, and
think?
each generation gets a worse version of what wildness is, doesn't it? Because each
Yes.
generation grows
Yeah.
up thinking this is normal, this is normal. So, and that's called shifting baseline syndrome, to give you a scientific term that has really amazed me since I've started to learn about it. But I think, again, having your perspective is fascinating, because something that we're very proud of in Britain is the 140,000 miles of public footpaths. And this is a brilliant resource across the whole country of public footpaths. You can look on maps and see where they are, and you have the legal right to walk through them. They go through farms and towns all over the place, and they're legal for everyone. So they're really important and wonderful. But I'd never really
Yeah.
thought about it from that point of view of how it does signpost you to go, this is where I will go, follow this, follow this, follow this. And where you've grown up, you've obviously had a wilder experience of, you just, once you're out of the town, you're and the farms, you're into the wild, and then you just follow your nose, you're properly in the wild. And
Yeah.
that's a wonderful, wonderful resource that we don't have in England.
Another thing that I'm just trying to put like my perspective on this is the sidewalks and the trees that grow around have, like, they need so much support to grow. Like, they cannot just grow on their own, and you have like hard plastic through which they come up, and they have to go straight and all that sort of stuff. Um, it's like it makes it difficult for trees to just grow as they are, and all of this seems like it has some financial gain behind it, which is why this is happening. It's not because people at the top are very happy about what's happening. There seems to be some sort of financial output out of this, which is why all of this is happening.
I think quite a lot of it is historical financial things. So, for example, over hundreds of years ago, England made a lot of money by exporting wool. So having sheep on the hills, and that would you get wool from the sheep, and England sold that all over the world and got seriously, ridiculously rich from the wool. So that was one aspect of it. And of course, then landowners want to own as much land as possible so that they can farm that and get wealthy from that. And I think this sort of culture of having lots of sheep has been really bad for our wild places in terms of them just eating all the little plants, and that's why there's very little variety of animals, particularly in the hills. And what becomes difficult here, though, is that are the uplands of England. So up in the north of England, the hills, which is very traditional sheep farming country, is very beautiful. If you asked an English person where's beautiful in England, I would say, oh, the north of England, it's really beautiful. And one of the reasons it's beautiful is because of the culture of farming, what these lovely dry stone walls and ancient barns, and a real ancient important culture. But unfortunately, that the farming intensively is really bad for wildlife. So something that's really difficult these days is, how can we protect wildlife, get it to come back to our country, help more people who are to get off their screens and to get out into nature and to have wild experiences, but also take care for the farmers and the farming communities who've been farming in this way for generations and who feel quite threatened by some of these changes. So it's not a simple thing to solve. It's all quite complicated.
Yeah, I completely understand that that point where the farmer community would be devastated by the kind of changes that we are asking them to bring. Um, but in the past, like when I was researching, I came up to this through this research, that there used to be a very wilder form of the British Isles. There were lots and lots of trees and marshes and woodlands and all that sort of stuff, which was first thrashed during the Norman conquest, when William the Conqueror, William the Bastard, who marched north, and he basically cut down all the sort of woodlands wherever he went, and and through that you come to this point where after that there was obviously industrialization, and things kept changing until the Second World War, when again there was another deforestation for people to grow more produce for the fighters. And through all these shifts in history, you come to a point where I feel at least that there is no sense of history or no sense of culture left in within like the English community. And that for me is so weird, because I like to talk about all of these things. And what happens is, um, English history is becomes synonymous with British history, and that's not all. There's a lot of pockets where you have a lot more culture and a lot more like different sort of food that you do, different sort of folklores and all of that sort of stuff, and it's all kind of diminished to a certain extent. And at least the kind of people that I met when I was in university, everyone hated to be called like English, or everyone hated to be called like British. And I feel like that sense of having a sense of um, I don't know, community or something that needs to be grown again, which can in turn kind of bring this sort of change where you have people again going back to rethinking what England was, or something like that. I don't know.
Yeah,
Do you
gosh,
think
it's
so?
so interesting. Yeah. I mean, England has been having a serious identity crisis probably since the Second
Yes.
World War, I guess. I mean, England, I nearly said then England won the Second World War, which is a classic English thing to say. So all the allied, massive amounts of allied nations won the Second World War, but then ever since then, Britain has been really in decline, and in terms of our power in the world, that's sort of decreasing, which I guess affects how people feel about themselves as a community. But also then Britain's got very complicated since the Second World War with immigration and becoming much more of a multicultural society, which I think is great, but it does then mix up just the pure English identity, perhaps of communities. Then there's so many layers to this, of course, because then British people are tending to think more about their history through that maybe
Right.
the colonial era and empire wasn't quite as wonderful as maybe our grandparents or great grandparents thought it was, and that it's actually hugely problematic. So that's quite a difficult thing to reconcile. Like, I'm English, I'm proud to be English, I'm proud of my country and my culture, and I'm proud of some of our history, but the more I learn, the more I think, whoa, this is dark and not
Yeah.
all great. And then to come racing forwards to the most recent time, probably about the time when you were in England, of course, we decided to have Brexit, which was a real statement of let's vote to be away from Europe and all of this stuff that's wonderful about being multicultural and together, and throw all that away and try and get back to being how we used to be, which in many ways was only ever an imagination and a dream. So, yeah, I'm not
Right.
surprised you found it a confused and confusing sort of place. It is interesting that so in Scotland, people are very proud to say I'm Scottish, and
Yes.
in Northern Ireland, people are very proud to be Irish. Um, but in England, it's more problematic to be proud of being English. You don't often see people flying English flags outside their houses, and if you do see that, then you might associate those people with maybe having voted for Brexit, things like that. So it's certainly a complicated time to be English.
Right. Okay. Um, sorry for dragging you into like all these political kind of
No, it's great. This is
questions,
great.
because
Normally people
I
ask,
always
normally I get asked boring questions about what sleeping bag do I use. So this is much more interesting.
all right. So
But sorry,
you,
let me ask you a question then. Did you enjoy your time in Britain? Did you feel that it was
yes,
did you feel welcome in Britain?
yes, definitely. I would say 90% of the time I was welcome, and 10% of the time I was not. But I would say that will be the same for anyone coming to India as well. There will always be good experiences and bad experiences. And I feel like the sense of freedom that I had, especially in thought, I would never get in any other country. I think like England in that sense was much more freer than anywhere else. But um, but yes, I have a soft corner for Scotland for some reason, because I lived in Edinburgh for a while, and I absolutely love that place. More because also because I was living in Cheltenham, which is not that great of a place to be spending like most of your time. So yeah, yeah.
Interesting. I went to
Uh,
a university in Edinburgh, so I also really like Edinburgh.
I love that. I love that hill. I forgot the name of it. You can just
Arthur's
go
Seat.
walking. Arthur's Seat, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, perfect. I love that place. I used to also go
Hmm.
to the nearby there was a Christian abbey of Benedictine monks nearby, and I for some reason I met this street philosopher who guided me to that place, and I went there, and I stayed there for a couple of days, and I absolutely loved like what Britain or whatever British Isles could have been in the past. Like it's like a pure representation of what it could have been, because it's so far into the countryside, and there's no sort of vehicles, there's roads, but there's not a lot of people around, and families around, and it's just so quiet, and it's absolutely amazing. So yeah. Okay, but right. So what I've seen is you were always apolitical about most of the stuff that you did, and most of the stuff that you were talking about. And through this, I see like a sudden shift into talking about this uh political stuff. Not so political, but I mean, it shouldn't be political. It should be the most natural response of anyone, but it is a political thing for some odd reason in this world that we are living in. So why this shift? Why this shift?
Um, Maybe I'm just getting old. I think yeah, you're right. I had deliberately nothing political for a long, long time, and everything I did on social media or blogging or anything like that was with one purpose, which is tell people about adventures and encourage people to go on adventures. That was everything I was trying to do. One mission. And of course, in my real life, away from the screen, I cared about politics and wars and immigration and all those things that we're all interested in. But online was just this one thing, dung, dung, dung. But in the last few years, I've become much more interested in nature and caring for our wild places, protecting our wild places. These feel more interesting and exciting, and certainly more important and more urgent to me than just the normal adventure stuff. And I've always loved the normal adventure stuff, so I wouldn't criticize anyone who's doing those sort of things at all. I loved all that. But for me now, at this time in my life, I'm much more interested in talking about trees and planting trees and making places wild again than I am about racing as quite quickly as you can on your bicycle somewhere. That's great, but I've moved on a bit in life.
It feels very weird that that this shift only happens when you're quite older in your life. But do you think like it can happen in the next generation much quicker, because there's an immediate need for it?
Yeah, I hope so, for sure. Yeah, I hope so. Um, yeah, I would say. I mean, the whole world is much more interested in talking about these sorts of things now, aren't they? They're finally, after decades and decades of a few scientists and a few people saying, "Hey, we need to pay attention." Finally, nearly everyone is starting to pay attention to this. And yeah, maybe I woke up to these things too late, but better late than never. But I think now, whether you're 27, 37, or 57, I think this is now an issue that's interesting to and important to all of us now. So yeah, hopefully the next generation can fix the things that we haven't done yet.
All right,
Over
let's
to you.
back let's get back to the adventures. Like, do you ever have this feeling of getting lost when you were on these big adventures? Because you've been talking about local adventures recently, but what did you think of when you were coming back to the society, when you were coming back to the city? Because going out in the wild was a completely different experience, and then coming back would be very difficult, I suppose.
Do you mean coming back to my country, to home, or do you mean getting into cities along journeys?
No, coming back to your home after finishing your
Okay.
adventures, I think.
Yeah, I think the what happens after an adventure is what somebody needs to write a good book about. It's such a important topic, and everyone I know who's been on big adventures um, thinks a lot about adventures, and they plan it all very carefully, and they get excited about it, and they look forward to it, and they think this adventure will solve all the problems in my life, and I'll come home and I'll be really happy and handsome and rich, and everything will be brilliant. Um, but actually, a lot of the time you go on adventures, you're sort of running away from something, probably. And when you eventually come back home, oh, look, the same problems are just there. But now perhaps even worse, because now you have the additional frustrations of thinking, my life here is so boring, and that adventure was so great. So there's now that different thing to contrast with as well. So most
Yeah.
people I know who've been on big adventures have struggled with coming home. You know, when I first come home, it's good fun and exciting for a little bit, and then after that, I would start to get quite down and just feel that,
Mm.
oh, this life is boring, and I want to be away on another adventure. And what about you, Ash? When you were on your big adventures, have you found it hard to come back?
Um, yeah, I think so because it was quite difficult finishing it off and thinking of, oh, okay, you're going back to the same sort of routine of whatever we call reality, and that's very weird to think of. But yeah, I don't know what motivated me to actually go on this journey, because I'd like to say that it was your and Leon's journey into the empty quarter which actually inspired me to go on this walk. And now after finishing this walk, I always had this question in mind, like what makes me or you or anyone who is doing an adventure to actually go on these sort of adventures? Like, what is it within us that cannot stop this sort of feeling of actually going out?
Um, I think for me personally, I think there are positive aspects and negative ones. And I suppose the negative ones are just this sort of frustration that my life is boring. Surely there must be more interesting things on the planet than what I'm doing today. I just want to get away from here. So there's that sort of escapist side of adventure within me.
Mm.
The more positive side is a curiosity of thinking, oh, where I live's pretty interesting, but I wonder what it's like over that next hill, over the mountain. I wonder what these other countries are like. So there's that curiosity of just wanting to see other places. Um, there's also the curiosity of what I am capable of doing. Like, wow, I wonder if I could do something difficult. How would I react if I was in these difficult situations? Would I just crumble, or would I rise to the challenge and overcome them? And that's quite interesting, maybe a bit scary, but interesting to discover about yourself. Um, and then I suppose a final thing is just adventures. They're hard often, but they're really fun. It's really fun. It's like going on holiday, basically. You just think, I'm going to go to somewhere really sunny and nice and eat different foods and meet different people. It's basically, I'm going to go on holiday, but I can't say to someone, hey, I'm going on holiday for 2 months, because they just think I'm lazy. So I have to say, I'm going on an adventure. And then they think, wow, you're amazing. So there is an element for me that it's just fun. Adventure is fun as well. It can't be
And do
too
you
fun, because if it's too fun, then you're only on vacation. So you need to have a bit of misery and suffering as well.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask you. Do you always have something in mind when you're going out on adventures, or it is or is it something that you make up during the adventures? Like, because you need to have some sort of of an issue that you're going out with, or some sort of a narrative that you're going out with, or do you just go and wing it?
I think I just go. And then, as you'll know, when you're actually doing the adventure, you have so much time to think. I mean, this is one of the good things, but also one of the crazy things. It's quite boring a lot of the time, just walking along, but you have so much time to think about things. And I have different ways to motivate myself. So
Mm.
sometimes on journeys, I'm imagining people at home, like my enemies at home, and I'm thinking, I'm not going to fail, I'm going to prove you wrong. Or sometimes maybe more positive, I think of my friends and my family, and like, wow, these people would be cheering me on, they'd be encouraging me. I don't want to let them down. So there's different sorts of motivations that come along, and some of these come, you get the complete change of them within 5 minutes, 5 minutes, 5 minutes, often depending on how hungry or tired you are at the time.
Well, you seem like a very eccentric person, like are you like that in real life? Like
uh, um, yeah, maybe
you
I
don't have
am.
to answer
That's
that.
that's the best compliment I've heard in ages.
Um, all right. So on a recent podcast, you mentioned that you like sitting still for an hour, and you have grown fond of that alone time over the years, and you like that time when you're just out there sitting on a log of wood or something like that. And it made me think of two things. So first was, it's very difficult to do that in a society nowadays where the society calls upon police if you're just sitting alone in the field or something,
I did have
having
clothes on.
and yeah. I have a question about that later on, but
Okay, so yeah.
um but it's very difficult to have an internal dialogue because it's sort of a lost act in our society nowadays. And the second thing is, this is exactly what contemplation and observation and witnessing whatever is happening, all the sort of old theological ideas were putting forward. So um, how did we just go so far away from this alone time with ourselves?
Well, I think we've just got busier and busier and busier since when the radio was invented and people first started to get a radio in their homes. Someone said, I don't know who it was, some famous person was saying, this is the end of society now. We've got the radio. No one will talk to each other anymore. This is terrible. And then, of course, comes the television, and then people say the same thing, and then computers, and then now smartphones. So it's just, I think, just more and more things demanding our attention, and there are so many easy temptations to just ignore everything else in life and just scroll through something online. So I think it's just that. Plus, we've got really busy, 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 busy. We're so much busier than our parents or grandparents used to be. And then perhaps there's a deeper thing that maybe links to some of the nature stuff we talked about earlier, which is this starting to disconnect from thinking about, hey, what's really important in life? Being out in nature, walking in the forest, the Japanese phrase of forest bathing, just spending time out in nature, which for thousands of years we would all have just done naturally by walking around the forest looking for something to eat. That sort of natural connection with the world and the sort of slowness of life. I think that's eroded as well. But I do think there's an appetite for it now. Yeah, maybe you can't sit on a log in the middle of a town and do this, but when I talk to people that this is something I do, nobody laughs at me and says that's a stupid thing to do. I think everyone can sort of internally feel like, yeah, this is kind of something that we need in our busy lives. There's the saying of if you're too busy to sit on a log for 20 minutes, you need to go sit on a log for 40 minutes just to slow down a bit.
I feel like I see the shift happening where people are sort of coming to this understanding where they understand that this busyness of life is more of an illusion than a reality, because most of the time they're spending are spending on their phones or television sets, or watching celeb gossip shows or something like that, or cooking shows or something like that, and which they could actually go out and spend in the wilderness. So I see this shift happening, and people are going out in the wild and exploring, foraging for new species and plants. something like that. Like, and I think it's a very good thing which is coming back. I learned about this thing called a stingy nettle soup, which I would have never known if there wasn't a friend of mine who was from Devon, who uh, who grew up in a farm, and his grandmother taught him how to do it. And so we were in university, and we were talking about this old ancient kind of techniques and foods that we had, and we were sharing each other. Like, I was sharing Indian and he was sharing his food, and that's where I learned about it. So that's something which is coming up, which is quite good. I feel like it's nice that sometimes culture also brings this sort of connection with ancient and ancestral kind of wisdom or knowledge or something like that. All right, we were talking about this shift that's been happening, and I have a quote from this theologian called Thomas Parry, who said who talked about this a couple of centuries past, and he called this the great conversation that we have lost. Like, the conversation that we used to have with nature. So going out in the wild, sitting at the seaside, listening to the tidal waves or something like that, listening to the birds and bees and all of that sort of stuff. And what we have started doing is we have started having a conversation with ourselves, with just one species, and that's where all the problems arise. That's where that's what he thinks. So what do you think about that? Like, what do you think about this kind of conversation that we used to have before? Because we have a long history where we were so connected with nature, and suddenly it is a shift where we are sort of living in a machine now.
Mm. Yeah, there's a really nice book called Braiding Sweetgrass, which is by I think, Canadian lady, a sort of native American lady, talking about the sort of Native American traditions of foraging from the land and the way that they would be grateful for, when they took some grass to braid into clothes or something or other, they would be very grateful and appreciative and realize that it's a give and take with nature. Whereas over time, we've now turned it into something we can use. It's just a product. It's just
Mm.
something that we can add to our economy. If we chop down this forest, we'll make $1 million. Brilliant. So it's become a commodity, really. And we often talk about having to go out into nature, and we forget that actually we are nature. All of us, we're animals living actually in the wild universe at all times. But you're right, we've been completely detached from it, and I think partly that's just due to humans being so incredibly clever. We no longer, if it rains, we don't get wet anymore. When it's snowing, or we don't get cold anymore. When it's night, you just turn on a light and you can carry on doing the things that you're doing. So our ingenuity and our inventiveness has accidentally really removed us from this. But I do think there's now an appetite more and more to get back towards these things. So I feel perhaps we're in part of the great turning. You talk about the great conversation. There's the idea of the great turning as well, of things are starting to turn around, I
Yeah,
hope.
but with that sort of ingenuity, don't you think that there used to be a sort of a rule or a law of nature, whatever it was? Like, in the winter season, you would hibernate, you would go inside your house and hibernate. And now, because we have moved past all those difficulties, we have increased with that a lot of mental issues because of that, because we don't have time to sit down and contemplate and hibernate anymore.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point, and it's certainly relevant to somewhere like Britain, where in the winter it's dark, it's cold, it's wet, it's really depressing. But also, people really do get depressed because it's so grim. But our modern society makes you feel as though we just have to keep going, boom, 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 boom,
Yeah.
everything just the same all the time. And I think I do start to read now about more people who are trying to just allow the winter to be a time of slowing down and hibernating and acting a bit more according to the seasons. I'm terrible at this. I can't ever slow down, but I always feel that I want to and I should. But yeah, I think trying to act according to the seasons, sleep more in the winter, be awake more in the summertime makes a lot of sense. It's natural, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think that this shift will definitely happen, and what you call the great turning will definitely come along. But I see, at least my generation, which is in the universities right now, or getting out of universities, or even younger kids. And I like this thing that you have been writing books for kids, because they really need to know what nature is, because I see it even in my locality, that when I was a kid, I used to go out and play with my friends, and we would be out in the woods, or somewhere near a lake, or somewhere in the river, and my parents would never know where I am, and they never cared about it, because it was the most natural thing to do. And suddenly I see that the next generation, or the younger kids, are nowhere to be seen. Like, I have no clue where they are on most parts. Even in England, I see that most of the people are always kind of jailed inside their homes, and they are never allowed to go out and access what used to be very easy for the previous generations. Did you have like some similar sort of upbringing when you were growing up?
Yeah, very much so. So mine sounds very similar to yours. It just my mum I'd have my breakfast and I'd go outside and I'd just come home when I was hungry at some point later, or if I'd had a fight with my brother. But generally, you just disappear for hours. So yeah, that was the case. And children today, everything is much more structured. There's not so much a case of just, hey kids, just go and play. It's now, oh, we need some nature. Okay, we'll pay some money and we'll go do an activity in an
Yeah.
organized nature sort of place. So there is definitely issues with that, and there's talk about nature deficit disorder, and nature disconnectedness, and there's a guy called Miles Richardson. He's now a professor in the University of Nature Connectedness. Just this is now a sort of studied thing of how important it is. It's something we feel within us, but now becoming sort of scientifically and sadly medically confirmed as well. So yeah, I think it's a real problem for young kids, and I think it's something I can't honestly see how that can easily be turned round, because kids who've grown up with a structured uh, childhood are unlikely, I imagine, when they become parents, say, "Yeah, go on, just go and play in the woods all day." So I can't really see how that turns round. I don't have a solution to that.
Because they have a sort of a mental pattern, a sort of a structured whatever they are going through, and it's difficult to change it when they are adults, because they've already gone through this behavior modification when they're kids. So it's very difficult to get back to, or even change it. I mean, it's surely possible if you put in the efforts, but how many people will do that? um
Yeah.
yeah, but there's another interesting thing that I've been seeing here in Southeast Asia, where the tourists that have been coming here are sort of unaware of the local culture. The new generation tourists, I mean, are sort of unaware of the culture, the way the people have been living a sustainable lifestyle for the previous centuries, and because it is a big boost to the economy, it means that all these people, all these countries have to change in a way which is adaptable to this new tourist. And it it's sort of in contrast with the Western world, who is now thinking of rewilding and going back to nature, and here we are kind of thinking of progress or development or whatever it is, this new sort of thing.
Yeah, this is a thing that people constantly argue about in Britain, for example, in terms of oh, we should rewild the countryside here because it's really important for nature. And then people say, yeah, but what about India and China? They're not rewilding, they're just busy building roads and towns and things like that. And I think that that notion of what of you not doing something because other people aren't doing it is ridiculous. So I think everyone should just carry on doing things in the way that they feel most appropriate. But also, of course, in the West, we have to remember that we have a in some cases a 200-year head start on other countries and cultures because we were busy just stealing everything from their countries for 200 years. So getting rich and building all our infrastructure and things. So to now be say that other people shouldn't be doing that feels quite hypocritical. But depending on though whether you're feeling in a positive mood or a negative mood about the future of the climate, you can look at China, which is probably the key country in this in many ways, China, India, and America. But China, you can either look negatively and say they're building 10 power stations every week or something, or you can say, wow, they are the single biggest investors in green technology and electric cars and all the sort of positive things as well. So it's never all good or all bad, I don't think.
Yeah, that's sort of like the kind of Taoist wisdom, right? It's always black and white and white and black. So it can never be this or that. So yeah, I completely agree with that point. That it's always going to be both of these things happening in simultaneously. Right. So, from all the experience that you've been on in your lifetime, would you top your list with the time when you were naked in a cabbage field in Spain?
So me being naked in a cabbage field in Spain, I've been naked in lots of fields in lots of countries, but that's a rare example of it being on camera. So yeah, so to explain this before I get arrested, I was walking through Spain playing the violin to earn some money. I'm very bad at the violin, but it was a wonderful, fantastic journey about trusting the universe and the kindness of strangers. Anyway, in hot countries, when you're camping out and you're not staying in hotels, you get quite hot and you get quite smelly. So if ever there's a chance to find a river or a lake, I love to have a swim, and I do this all over the world. But in Spain, and the incident you're talking about, it was the big cabbage fields with the irrigation spray. So the ones go spreading water over hundreds of meters, and it was so hot I couldn't resist just having a shower in the irrigation spray. So it was yeah, it was good fun.
I've tried doing that in India when I was on my short
Okay.
journey. But yeah, it's amazing. Um, the last question. So you've started getting reviews for this book, right? And I assume that there will be a lot of good and bad reviews. And I like the segment that you do on your Instagram, Not So Glowing reviews. So what's the sort of worst review that you've got about this book?
Yeah, so when you're a writer, it's lovely when people tell you nice things. They say, "Oh, your book's great." That feels really nice because I've spent ages working on it, and so it feels important when people say, "Oh, yeah, this is a good book," and that makes me feel better. But of course, sometimes people write you bad reviews, and if you're willing to believe and accept the good reviews, then I also believe you need to be willing to accept and believe the bad reviews. So you might not agree with them and they might be personally painful, but the person has equal right to say these. But so over the years, I've written quite a lot of books, so I've got a lot of reviews over the years, and I've got lots of good reviews. I don't remember any of those. It's like nice, but I don't remember them. The bad reviews, I can tell you a bad review from 15 years ago, almost word for word. This stays in you. It's and so what I've started to do is read out on Instagram my really bad reviews. And this has been a brilliant exercise in owning it, owning the experience. And it's so healing and
Really good.
cathartic. Yeah. And now I just find them funny. And this new book that I brought out, it's only been out a couple of weeks, so it's got about 50 good reviews. And I actually found myself scrolling through Amazon, excited about getting my first bad review, just so I could read one out. So it's been a good process. The worst, but so the worst review I've had about this book so far links to a question you asked earlier about me starting to be more political. And I did worry with this book that people would think it was going to be my usual sort of book, which is eccentric English adventurer doing adventures. But it's not really. It's a bit more political. And I was worried some people wouldn't like that. And I was right, because someone emailed me saying, I started reading your book this week. it will be a long time before I finish it because I almost threw it in the bin this morning. He was very, very angry that I was writing about the some of the environmental impact of meat production and eating meat, and he got very angry about that. But to be honest, I actually want people who will be angry about these issues to read the book. I don't want it to be just people who agree with everything I say. So I want to try and spark some thoughts and some conversations as well.
Which is really good, because what you've been doing throughout the years, where you're promoting people to go out on adventures, and now you're trying to make them inquire and contemplate where they are going and why they are going there, and sort of the things that go behind, the travels, which is really, really interesting, I think. With that, thank you, Alastair, for joining me on this podcast, and I really wish you the best, because the sort of things you have been doing, it definitely inspired me, and I think it will inspire a lot of other people, a lot of other young adventurers who are trying to go out and trying to do something wild. So with that, I think it's an honor to have you.
Well, thank you. I've really enjoyed our conversation. I've also enjoyed our private email conversations about your adventures and your projects and your films and things. So yeah, it's really nice to have a good chat with you. Thank you.